Good evening and welcome. If you're already in bed, soften your pillow, loosen your jaw, and let your breath settle. Tonight we drift, gently and unhurried, to a tiny country tucked inside a larger city. A place wrapped in stone and ritual, in light and shadow. We are going to the Vatican, a place so small you could walk across it in a few minutes, and yet so vast in memory that entire empires seem to echo in its corridors. People ask, what secrets is the Vatican hiding? Maybe the better question is, what stories sleep there, in marble and ink, waiting for a quiet night like this to be heard? Imagine Rome at dusk. The day's heat fades, and the colors soften. The ochres and terracottas of ancient walls glow as if lit from within. Footsteps scatter on cobblestones. Somewhere a glass clinks. A scooter murmurs past, a brief dragonfly of noise in a settling pond of evening. We cross a bridge over the Tiber, and the river drifts like a ribbon of history, calm, indifferent, older than any crown. Ahead rises the dome of St. Peter's, lantern-lit against a navy sky, vast, serene, like a planet lifting itself above the horizon. The closer we come, the more the dome seems to breathe, not with lungs, but with centuries. We step into the great embrace of St. Peter's Square. The space opens like a kind pair of arms. Bernini designed it that way, to gather pilgrims and kings, doubters and dreamers, into a single, quiet ellipse. The colonnades stand like rows of white trees, each column a trunk, each capital a canopy, and above them, a procession of stone saints who keep their own steady, weathered vigil. The square changes with light. By day it's a bright theater. By night, a seashell filled with echoes. Here you could whisper a prayer or a question, and hear it glide out into the open air. What secrets live here? The square does not answer. It simply holds your question without judgment, as old places do. Behind those colonnades is a sovereign state. It has its own flag, its own postage, its bank, its laws, its guard in uniforms as bright as harlequin flowers. But the true borders of the Vatican are not walls. They are archives, stories, beliefs, the slow accumulation of decisions made across centuries of human time. Every door opens to another door, and each door opens into a room with a desk, with paper, with ink, with a human hand making a mark. A tiny country, yes, but one that once spoke to kings, and sometimes for them, and sometimes against them. A place of ritual, of art, of prayer, and of paper. So much paper. If we could float, gently, like a quiet breeze through a keyhole, we might pass into the Vatican's apostolic palace, and farther still, into the libraries and archives that have seated so many myths. People like to imagine the secret archives as a single forbidden chamber, with one heavy door and one heavy key. In truth, what is secret here is often simply private. As with any old household where the attic is full of letters and the trunks are full of family history. But privacy, over centuries, becomes mystery. Mystery becomes rumor, and rumor grows tall, like ivy. Think of corridors lined with shelves, shelf after shelf, a horizon of bindings faded to honey and smoke. The air smells of dust and linen, a soft papery sweetness. There are letters from monarchs who once dallied with eternity and now linger only in signatures. There are records of councils where delicate phrases were weighed like gold dust. There are maps where the edges of the world fray into dragons and guesses. There are copies of trials and defenses, of oaths and apologies, of pleas and proclamations. human voices pressed into pages like flowers between glass. Some of these documents are known: the correspondences of artists and popes, the records of inquisitions and reforms, the knots of diplomacy that tied and untied kingdoms. Scholars, with patience and credentials, request a box, sit beneath a reading lamp, and enter a past that is both fixed and flickering. The rules are strict not because there is always a scandal to hide, but because time itself is fragile. A single careless gesture can erase the last surviving trace of a conversation that shaped a century. And so the slowness here is a kind of reverence. A turning page becomes a kind of prayer. Still, the imagination loves what it cannot easily enter. And so stories sprout, about rooms with dangerous truths, about manuscripts that could revise our sense of beginnings, about codices that muddy neat lines between myth and history. Perhaps the deepest secret of any archive is simply this: for every page we hold, there are 10 more we cannot reach. For every letter we can read, a dozen inked in a hand we no longer recognize. The unknown is not a conspiracy. It is the ordinary condition of the past. But ordinary mysteries are the best kind for night listening. They do not shock, they shimmer. If we leave the archive and drift into the library proper, we find a different kind of quiet. In the Vatican Library, the light is the main reader, every window a pupil, and the sun a patient librarian. Here, manuscripts bloom with colors that do not die: lapis for heaven, vermilion for fire, gold for the breath of the sacred. A book can be a small cathedral. You open the cover and step into a nave no wider than your palm. On the margins, tiny creatures peer out, hares and birds and saints and dragons, like the stray thoughts of a medieval mind. The scribes who made these pages worked by candle and daylight, letter by letter, often without knowing whether their labor would be read by many or by none. They worked anyway. In that way, a library is a monument to faith, not only religious faith, but faith in time and attention, and in the idea that some reader in some future might need exactly these words.
There is another chapter of Vatican secrecy that is less about paper and more about lists. The old index of forbidden books. For centuries it was a guide of what not to read, a hedge to guard certain minds from certain ideas. Looking back, it's easy to smile at the earnestness of any institution that thinks ideas can be locked away like silverware. Ideas travel the way air does, in drafts and whispers, between friends. Still, the index tells us something about fear and about care, that people often mistake one for the other. When a culture is afraid, it sometimes calls its fear protection. When a culture is protective, it sometimes calls its care control. The truth rustles between the two like a leaf. Over time, the list dissolved into history, and what remained were the books themselves, still as stubborn and lively as the hands that wrote them. We step back outside and the Vatican is again a city of stone and sky. The Swiss guards stand like bright bookmarks against the margins of a doorway, blue, red, gold, deliberate and still. Their presence is ceremonial and practical, pageantry with a purpose. Ceremony often looks like a secret from the outside, but ceremony is simply a language written in gestures. You see it in the way a halberd is held, in the measured pace of a procession, in the quiet gravity of a salute. The Vatican speaks fluently in this language. It is not hiding when it performs. It is telling you something in a dialect older than microphones. Inside St. Peter's Basilica, the air is cool and shared. Pilgrims become small. Light pours through high windows and lands in gentle squares on the marble floor, like pages of an invisible book. The dome above, designed to lift the heart, does its work. It makes you light, then it makes you quiet. Here, secrets feel unnecessary. Everything is already exposed to height and to echo. You could spend hours just drifting from chapel to chapel, reading the faces of statues as if they were listening to you. Angels rest their elbows on clouds. Saints look stern or serene. Marble drapery hangs in folds so soft you can imagine the sound it would make if a breeze found it. Beneath the basilica is another city, and below that, another, layers of ground like pages in a book you can walk through. The tradition holds that the Apostle Peter rests here, that the church above stands like a stone tree rooted in a fisherman's death and a fisherman's faith. Whether you hold this as literal or symbolic, the idea is strong and simple, that a community can grow from a single life, and that a single life can become a kind of compass. Standing in that lower light, surrounded by the hush of centuries, one feels how small the human voice is, and how big the human echo. Not far away, the Sistine Chapel waits, the room that is almost more famous than the Vatican itself. You look up, and the story of creation unfurls across a sky of paint. Hands almost touch, prophets curl like seashells. Architectural illusions hold the whole in an invisible frame. People speak, quietly, because a guard hushes them, and in the hush you hear many small intakes of breath, that soft punctuation of awe. We tend to imagine that beauty is loud, but the deepest beauty is usually a quiet rearrangement inside the chest, an adjustment of inner furniture that makes more room for sky. Some say the paintings hide codes, anatomy veiled as shape, messages tucked in folds of color. Others say the only code here is patience. The mind often searches for secret doors where the master simply left us windows. Perhaps the only secret the Sistine Chapel keeps is this: that art can teach doctrine without a single line of argument, that color can carry weight like marble, that stories painted on plaster can outlast any speech. You could stand here until your neck aches. You close your eyes and still see blues and umbers dancing under your lids. Outside again, the Vatican gardens ripple green behind walls that keep them from being trampled by curiosity. This isn't secrecy in the cloak and dagger sense. It is the ordinary boundary that protects fragility. Gardens keep secrets the way spring keeps seeds. The patterns of shade at noon, the way a fountain softens the outer city's traffic into a simple rain of sound, the small footpaths where a figure might walk and think before facing the world. These are the secrets of any garden, special only in how gently they insist on being private. If you listen, you can hear the leaf sound of time, a soft applause for everything that grows at its own speed. The Vatican's relationship to the wider world has never been simple. It has been, at different times, a counselor, a critic, a power, a refuge. It has known controversies that stretched like storms across decades and quietly necessary reforms that passed like clear mornings. When people ask about secrets, they often mean scandals. Moments when human frailty shows through the robe of office. Of course, such moments exist. Every institution built by people contains the people inside it. There are chapters of finance and politics, of errors confessed and errors denied. Those stories matter. But there is another kind of secret, quieter and less headline-worthy. the way a system finds the courage to correct itself, the way a tradition makes room for listening, not as a spectacle, but as a practice, slow, imperfect, and real. Some evenings, if you could climb in your mind to the old summer residence on a hill and then much farther than that, you'd find the Vatican looking up at the same sky that we do. There is, after all, a small but serious observatory in the tradition of the Church, a reminder that curiosity about the heavens is not a modern invention. Telescopes do not abolish mystery. They enlarge it. They teach humility by distance. A star that appears as a pinprick becomes a world of fire. A nebula becomes a slow bloom of dust and light. The great secret of the sky is that it is not a ceiling. It is a question written in darkness. And somehow the Vatican, this tangle of archives and altars, has kept that question alive, too. Let us walk the corridors once more, softly, like someone checking on sleeping children. Here is a door that leads to a small museum, where reliquaries shine like tiny suns. Whether their contents are exactly what tradition says, or whether time has blurred labels and memories, the effect is the same. A golden hush. People have carried hope to these cases for centuries, and hope, like any sweet perfume, lingers. A fragment of wood, a cloth, a bone. These are not proofs so much as bridges. Bridges from one heart to another, from a far century to this one. In another room hangs a map that is not a picture of the world but a picture of how the world once felt. Seas are wide and guessed at. Coastlines wander. Little ships tilt on painted waves. To walk past such maps is to feel the courage of those who traveled them for real. Against winds they didn't understand. Toward shores they couldn't predict. Perhaps the Vatican keeps secrets for the same reason an old sea keeps wrecks. Not to hoard, but because time is a collector. Everything that sinks is kept somewhere. What about the tunnels people whisper about? Well, any large complex of buildings breeds practical passageways, service corridors, storerooms, ways to move quietly from one place to another without crossing the crowded squares. Such spaces do exist, as they do beneath palaces and theaters around the world. We hear tunnel and think of escape and intrigue, but most of the time the secret is simpler. A way to move linens, a place to store chairs, a path to carry the mundane work that keeps the visible grandeur breathing. The human hand that polishes a rail, that replaces a bulb, that oils a hinge. These are the anonymous keepers of any city's everyday miracles. Their names aren't carved in stone, but without them, the stones would go mute. There were times when the Vatican's choices rippled outward in wounding ways, and times when its quiet actions sheltered those in danger. The record is complex, and no single verdict will do. Yet complexity is itself a kind of truth. To honor the truth is not to varnish it. It is to say, these are the facts we have, the questions we still hold, and the willingness to look again when new pages are opened. Even now, scholars continue to request boxes in the archives, to thread needles through the fabric of the past, to stitch what can be stitched, and to leave unsewn the places where the cloth is missing. This is another secret of old institutions. They move more slowly than rumor, but often more surely. The Daily Vatican is less mysterious than the stories would make it. Morning begins with keys turning in locks that have turned in the same metal for years. A caretaker sweeps a courtyard. A gardener inspects leaves for a touch of disease and finds only dew. A bell marks the hour. A clerk walks with a folder from one office to another, greeting a security guard by name. In a small dining room, someone spoons soup into a bowl and sits with quiet gratitude for a simple meal. If you could hover invisibly, you would see that most of the life here is ordinary life, dressed in the clothes of place and purpose. The extraordinary is not in the exotic. It is in the endurance. And yet, the mystery persists. Not the breathless mystery of conspiracy, but the slower mystery of meaning. What does it mean for a city to hold both memory and authority? What does it mean to claim continuity with a fisherman killed long ago, and to let that claim shape laws and liturgies, art and calendars, music and silence? In a way, the Vatican's greatest secret may be the same one every person carries. How belief becomes behavior, how conviction becomes care, how stories we tell ourselves shape the world we build. As evening returns, St. Peter's Square empties, then quietly fills again, then empties once more. The stones have learned the rhythm of feet and weather. A breeze comes up the river and slides across the colonnade like a shawl. Somewhere a tourist takes a final photograph, and the flash seems too loud for such a tender dark. The saints on the roofline keep their look, patient, unsentimental, mild. They have seen fountains freeze and thaw, regimes rise and fall, the swift rearrangements of history that feel, inside the moment, like forever, and later turn out to be afternoons. Some of the questions people bring here, about God, about power, about suffering, about the long argument between old and new, will not find an answer on any shelf. The archives can tell you what someone said, and when, and sometimes even why, in the narrow sense that why admits to paper. But the larger why, the one that breathes under our ribs, stays elsewhere. Perhaps that is the Vatican's most carefully kept secret, that the answers we want it to disclose live not behind a door, but within the visitor. The building can only lend you its silence. It cannot speak for you. Listen now to that silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of rest. The hush that settles on a square after the last tour group has left. The sound of a broom on stone. The feathered hush of a bird's wings as it flits from balustrade to balustrade. In the library, a shade is drawn against the night. In the gardens, a fountain continues its patient syllables. In a tiny chapel, a little red lamp breathes its steady dot of light, like a heart that is unafraid to keep beating. We can walk, if you like, slowly, down the nave of the basilica one last time. Each step clicks softly, then fades. Candles waver. Gold catches the last blue of the evening and turns it warm. Above us the dome, and above the dome the sky, and above the sky the endless dark woven with scattered fires. It is a good stack of mysteries. Architecture, atmosphere, universe. None of them are solved here. All of them are welcomed. You can put your hand on the cool stone of a column and feel how even stone remembers the warmth of hands. Then you can lift your hand, and the column will stand, and your warmth will go with you. Outside, night deepens over Rome. The river carries a ribbon of moon. If we sit on a bench at the edge of the square and wait, we will see the lights in certain windows click out, one by one, like stars admitting that they too are tired. It becomes easier to imagine that somewhere inside, behind an ordinary wooden door, A scholar has finished a paragraph and placed a scrap of paper to mark his place. He stands, rubs his eyes, and thinks of what he will try to find tomorrow. The secret he is after may be no more sensational than a missing date, or a clearer phrase, or a letter that places a person at a particular table on a particular day. These small secrets are the mortar that holds the past together. Without them, history is a pile of stones. The wind nudges a flag. It lifts, trembles, sleeps again. If you are still awake, feel how your breath has found the rhythm of this place. Longer on the exhale, patient on the inhale. There is time enough for the questions. You do not have to solve the Vatican tonight. You do not have to solve yourself either. You have only to rest in the company of long memory and to let your own life join the great archive of lives that tried, in their ways, to be faithful to an idea, to a craft, to a person, to a hope. Before we go, think once more of the word secret. It has a sibling in the word sacred. They share a root that points to setting something apart, not because it is forbidden, but because it deserves a different kind of attention. The Vatican, for all its public squares and open doors, is a place of the set apart. Some of that setting apart has been wise, some has been mistaken, much has been ordinary. But the invitation to you, tonight, is to practice that attention, to give your mind permission to lower its volume, to let the world be large and half-known, and to discover that you can sleep even without perfect answers. If you need a final image to carry into sleep, imagine a key. It is small, unremarkable, just a sliver of iron and a loop for a finger. Imagine that it turns not in a lock of metal, but in a lock of time. Each night, somewhere in the Vatican, keys turn like that, in and out, keeping the rhythm of days. The doors they open lead to rooms. The rooms open to hallways. The hallways open to squares. The squares open to sky. That is all any city is. That is all any human story is. One door, then another, into a widening field of light. Now, let your eyes be heavy. If they are already closed, let them be heavier still. The dome is only a circle in your mind now. The square is only a soft shape. The archives are closed, the lamps are low, the pages are safe. The saints on the roofline do not mind if you sleep. They have watched over sleep for a very long time. Breathe in, breathe out. The Vatican keeps its secrets, and you keep yours, and the night keeps both without effort. Good night. Sleep well. And if you dream, may your dream be a calm corridor, lined with quiet books, leading always to light.